The Tuesday, December 17th edition of the program. We welcome you into the lunch break, KDUS AM 1060, the abridged version. I think for once we are actually staying true to the moniker of the lunch break because we have a 30-minute show today. ASU women's basketball at the bottom of the hour. Pregame will start, so we've got you up until 11:30. So a true lunch break, a 30-minute lunch break here for you on the Tuesday edition of the show. We have a lot to do. Not a lot of time to do it in. Right before we went on the air, it was announced that the Cardinals will play the Saturday night game, December 28th. We were awaiting the schedule for next weekend, actually the last 2 weekends of football. We don't have the times yet for these games. We now know that the Cardinals-Rams contest will be the Saturday night game. 8 p.m. Eastern time is when that will kick off, so 6 p.m. for us out here on the West Coast. And the most important thing about it is you beat the Panthers this Sunday, and we will get into that tomorrow, the rest of the week here on the show. You win that game, you get to 8-7, you are setting up for a showdown. You are setting up for the biggest game of the season. Bigger than the two Seattle games, bigger than the Minnesota game. With 2 games left in your schedule, if you get to 8-7, you play a game against the Rams. Kyler Murray in a big spot against Sean McVay and the Los Angeles Rams. It's like I'm back in that wild card year all over again. That's how important that game could become. So we learned that they have been scheduled for Saturday, December 28th at 6:15 out here in Arizona. That is not where we were going to start the show today. Just some news that was passed along before we got on the air. So why don't we get into what is today's Daily Special?
Time for our top story of the day. It's the Daily Special.
It's some basketball because it's the story that won't go away. Doesn't matter what I do here on this show. Doesn't matter what other people do in social media land. The story will not go away. The rumors of Jimmy Butler and the Phoenix Suns will not die. Can't do it. I can say how much it's not going to happen. I can talk about all of the difficulties that you would have in said trade, yet we are analyzing Jimmy Butler's hair color. We are analyzing what every reporter is saying about this story. It is the story that won't go away, and it got worse yesterday because Brian Windhorst went on his podcast. I think it's called The Hoop Collective is the podcast that he is on. And he went on that podcast, and he was talking about Jimmy Butler and the trade. And he made it unequivocally clear. The Phoenix Suns are interested in Jimmy Butler. He said, not a controversial statement, just telling it like it is. I know for a fact that the Phoenix Suns are interested in Jimmy Butler. Okay, that's Brian going out on the ledge there, making a claim. Remember, we had the back and forth between Shams and Jimmy Butler's agent about the report about wanting to be traded and who he wants to be traded to, and the agent saying, no, it's not true. Well, you have another reporter coming out and saying, nope, the Suns are definitely interested in Jimmy Butler. This is something that is being discussed, it is being talked about. And then he went on to talk about why this is so difficult. And in doing so, he reminded me of something that I didn't even think about. He said there are 3 hurdles for the Suns to clear if they were attempting to trade for Jimmy Butler. We talked about 2 of those hurdles here on this show. Hurdle number 1, the most important hurdle, you have to get Bradley Beal to waive his no-trade clause. That's hurdle number 1. Without that, it's not even worth the thought exercise to put a package together for Jimmy Butler. You need Bradley Beal because the only players you can trade, and Windhorst goes on to talk about this, are Kevin Durant, Devin Booker, and Bradley Beal. The Suns can't aggregate salaries as a second apron team, so these deals have to be basically 1 for 1, and they'll have to bring in the third team to make sure all the math works. But they are limited in what they can do. They're not trading Kevin Durant. They're not trading Devin Booker. Bradley Beal would be the player of the 3 that they would trade. So step 1, you have to get Bradley Beal to waive his no-trade clause. We talked about this. We said it was the hardest hurdle for them to clear because it doesn't matter who the team is. It doesn't matter what the trade is. Getting somebody to waive their no-trade clause is extremely difficult. So that's hurdle number 1. Hurdle number 2 we talked about on this show was, great, Bradley Beal waives his no-trade clause. You now need to come to terms on a deal with the Miami Heat. You need to come to terms on compensation. You need to come to terms on what third teams need to be involved, if any. There are more logistical hurdles after you get the no-trade clause to be waived. There's a third hurdle that I didn't think about. And it's a hurdle that Brian Windhorst brought up. And this is why your dreams of Jimmy Butler being a Phoenix Sun are dashed today. Because those two hurdles we talked about last week. The third hurdle, one I didn't even consider, is that any team that is going to trade for Bradley Beal is going to want to take that no trade clause and put it off the table. They are going to agree to a trade for Bradley Beal under the context that he removes that from his contract, that he removes that no trade clause from his deal so that they aren't strapped with the same limitations that the Phoenix Suns are currently limited to. So Bradley Beal has to waive his no trade clause. You have to agree on the compensation. And according to Brian Windhorst, you're going to have to get Bradley Beal to agree to remove that no trade clause from his contract. And Windhorst points out in the past, that's been a non-starter. It's difficult to make a trade when you don't have any of this stuff. It's difficult to make a trade when you aren't dealing with players that have no trade clauses, when you aren't dealing with being a second apron team and all of the handcuffs that come with that. It's difficult for two teams that are operating normally to be able to agree on a trade. You are now adding in two elements that are going to make this a non-starter. It's not happening. If Jimmy Butler gets traded, it is not going to be to the Phoenix Suns. There's too much red tape to cut through. There's red tape I didn't even think about. I wasn't even considering the idea that the team would ask Bradley Beal to take the no trade clause and throw it in the trash can. But you can understand that from their perspective, they're not going to trade for a guy who's got $100+ million. I think it's $110 million still owed to him on the remainder of his deal, and also be handcuffed in the same way that the Suns are. They're not going to sign up for that. They are not going to want that to be their future. They are seeing what the Suns are dealing with, and they are seeing the limitations that the Suns have on themselves to try to put together a roster with Bradley Beal's salary, with Bradley Beal's no trade clause. They want no part of it. So you can maybe do two of these three hurdles. You might be able to get Bradley Beal to waive his no trade clause. You might be able to agree on compensation with the Miami Heat. You're not going to get Bradley Beal to get rid of the no trade clause. And that's the best case scenario. There's also the scenario of he might not want to waive his no trade clause. He might be extremely happy where he's at. The only reason why we're talking about this is because Miami was his original preferred destination when he was in Washington, before he got to the Phoenix Suns. And so we can continue to take these trips around the sun. We can continue to wake up every single day and read a new rumor and read a new report about the Suns' interest in Jimmy Butler and Jimmy Butler's interest in the Suns. And normally, if this was a normal NBA trade, if this was a normal situation, Jimmy Butler would be on the Phoenix Suns. This is not a normal situation. The Phoenix Suns are not operating like a normal NBA organization. That's not a shot at them. They pushed all their chips in the middle. They went all in. They became a second apron team. There are consequences that come with that. One of the major consequences, you are extremely limited in what you are able to do trade-wise. Then you add on top of that, one of the assets that you can trade has a no-trade clause. It's incredibly difficult. This is not a normal trade. If this was the offseason and the Suns were under the apron and they were looking for a superstar and Jimmy Butler said, I want to play for the Phoenix Suns, Jimmy Butler would be a Phoenix Sun. We have seen this before. We have seen players do this. Anthony Davis is an example that comes to mind. There are countless number of examples we can point to in recent memory of players forcing their way to a certain team. I got that. This is not a normal situation. The Phoenix Suns are not operating normally. They have limitations on them, both with their roster, in terms of the no trade clause, but also in terms of their overall big picture perspective, that being their salary cap and being over the second apron. So this is not happening. I don't know how many times I need to say this. We yesterday made a declaration that about the Phoenix Suns December 16th that they were going to be a first-round exit, right? That was my declaration yesterday. There's an amendment to that declaration because last week I made a declaration. We'll have to go back and see the exact date last week that I did it. But I said this isn't happening. I'm always going to err on the side of path of least resistance. The Heat are going to need to get good value or else they won't move Jimmy Butler. But if they are going to move Jimmy Butler, they are going to do so with the least amount of red tape to cut through, the least amount of hurdles. They want this to be a quick process. If they're going to move on from Jimmy Butler and trade him, because they certainly aren't extending him, if they're going to do this, they don't want it to drag on and on and on. Dealing with the Phoenix Suns would drag this on and on and on, because you get that phone call, you're the Miami Heat, you're Pat Riley, you get that phone call, Phoenix Suns are interested, I'm not even entertaining whatever compensation, whatever other teams I need to call, I'm not even entertaining your phone call until you tell me Bradley Beal has waived his no-trade clause. And then from there, I got to talk to Bradley Beal and his representation, because I'm taking that no-trade clause off the table. Not happening. You can twist yourself into a pretzel all you want to try to convince yourself that the Suns will be able to get out of this situation that they put themselves in. It's not happening. This is their roster. They are either going to win or lose, succeed or fail with this roster. That's it. That's why yesterday we said first-round exit is where this team is heading towards. They are barreling down towards the same fate that they had a year ago, because I don't trust this team. I didn't trust them at the end of last year, and they have given me zero reason this year to trust that things are going to be different. Coming up on the other side, this is weird. We are wrapping up this edition of the Lunch Break. How about that Monday Night Football game last night for the Schubert Six? That's right, we'll talk about that. And more importantly, in order to sign him, will they have to go to a place we've rarely seen them go? That's next on the Lunch Break, KDUS AM 1060. The show's halfway over. This is weird. I don't know what to do, producer Corey. I don't know what to do. A lot to do, little time to do it. A lot more stuff to do later on in the week. Last night, Monday Night Football, the doubleheader, the first game of that doubleheader. Is it considered a doubleheader if they don't start at the same time?
I mean, most folks said it was.
Okay, so we're gonna blend in with the crowd.
Yeah.
We're gonna be sheep. We're just gonna do what everybody else does.
I
Doubleheader.
mean, no point dying on this hill.
Okay, yeah, that's fair enough. Doubleheader last night in the NFL to close out Week 15. We will do the post-Week 15 NFL Power Rankings on tomorrow's show, so you can stay tuned for that. We will rank all of the teams, the top 10 teams in the NFL after Week 15 as we get into crunch time. Week 16, 17, and 18, 3 games to go for everybody on the calendar. It is that time. It is playoff time for a lot of teams who can't afford another loss, the Arizona Cardinals being one of those teams. So we will continue to look ahead for the Panthers, the post-Week 15 Power Rankings tomorrow. A lot for us to get into tomorrow's show. But the Vikings, it went exactly as we thought it was going to, right? We said this game was going to look more like the 3 quarters that they played against the Bears when they were in Soldier Field than it would the 4th quarter. That's exactly how it played out. The Vikings dominated from the word go, and we dominated in the Schubert 6 this week. 5-1, our best week to date since we started. More importantly, we are 12-6 over our last 3 weeks. So if you have been following along and you have joined the journey the last 3 weeks on the show, you're doing pretty well. 12-6, so 12 of 18. And most of the time, we've been hitting a lot of the big ones, the 6-point play, the 5-point play, the 4-point play. So if you have been tagging along, nicely done, a big 5-1 weekend. We hope to continue that march forward and increase that record even more so this week with the Schubert 6 on Friday, and maybe we'll sprinkle in a Thursday night play. We've had some success the last couple of weeks picking Thursday night, so we may want to stay there. We will wrap up this edition of the lunch break. We've got ASU women's basketball coming up in about 12 minutes. Pregame show. Jeff Munn will have you covered. They are in California today, so a little road action. They've got you started here in about 11 minutes or so. I saw a story in The Athletic that was kind of moving us into the next stage of the hot stove, the next stage of the offseason, and it was from Jim Bowden over at The Athletic, who talked about 6 moves, either trades or signings, for would-be contenders. So for teams that maybe are on the fringe of being a contender, these are moves, trades, signings, things that they can do to improve their team. And anytime I see one of these stories, I click on it to see, are the Diamondbacks going to be mentioned? One, it allows me to see if there's the pulse nationally on the Diamondbacks, because we get very hyper-focused here. Obviously, it's our team. They're in our backyard. We cover them on a regular basis. We talk about them at length. So it's interesting to see if they penetrate the national perspective, if they penetrate the national noise in stories like this. Well, they did, because the move that was suggested was for them to re-sign Christian Walker. And here is what Bowden said about Walker and the Diamondbacks' pursuits of him. Quote, "He's one of the Diamondbacks' leaders and a backbone of their team. If they want to return to the playoffs, it's imperative they re-sign Walker, even if they have to go to a 4th year to get a deal done. It would probably take 4 years and $100 million to land Walker, who will turn 34 in March. It would be especially risky at the back end of the deal, but that's the price to do business in 2024. End quote. Lots to unpack there. I want to focus on the $100 million part of this, because I have been on record saying that I thought $25 million a year is probably where this is going to settle, $375. This story from Bowden is saying you're going to have to go to that 4th year. You're going to have to go to a length that maybe the Yankees won't go to. Maybe the Yankees won't go 4 years for a 34-year-old first baseman who will be 38 by the end of the deal. Maybe the Mets won't go that far. Maybe the Nationals won't go that far. They'll go 3, but they won't go 4. They won't go to that illustrious 4th year on the contract. Then there's the $100 million part of it. And I consider myself a baseball historian. I consider myself somebody who loves to dive into the history of teams, sports, organizations, franchise history, everything. I want to know cover to cover what has gone on with the team. And when I saw that number, when I saw you'd have to get to $100 million, my initial thought was, how often have the Diamondbacks done that in free agency? Corbin Carroll, they signed to that extension, right? That was over $100 million, but that was a player in-house that they gave a long-term deal to. How often have they done this in free agency? Well, the historian that I am, I decided to do a little digging. I looked at this, and I have in front of me a list of every free agent signing that the Arizona Diamondbacks have made since 1998. So in their history. And it is sorted by guaranteed money. And do you know how many contracts, how many times the Diamondbacks in free agency have given out a deal of $100 million or more? Once. One time in their history have they given out a free agent deal, extensions aside, right? In-house extensions to a player who's under team control aside. Free agents. They've done it once. It was Zach Greinke's 6-year, $206.5 million deal back in 2016. Now, you may say, well, Chris, they've had a bunch of players who were on their team that hit free agency, and they brought them back. What about those? The most money they've ever given out to a player who falls into that bucket, you have to go to last offseason. Lourdes Gurriel Jr., they signed him to a 3-year, $42 million deal back in last offseason that takes him through the 2026 campaign. That's it. They hit $85 million with Madison Bumgarner. They hit $80 million last year with Eduardo Rodriguez. Those are the only 3 deals worth $80 million or more. That's it. That is the limit that the Diamondbacks have set on themselves. Only one time they have gone over $100 million, and they doubled it with Zach Greinke's $206.5. So the question you have to ask yourself, with a franchise that their track record says they don't do this, they don't play in those waters. They get close with the 80-85 for Eduardo Rodriguez, Madison Bumgarner. They've gone over one time for Zach Greinke. Do you think that Christian Walker falls into the same category, the same bucket that Zach Greinke fell into? Willing to go outside of our norms. Now, while he would cost half as much as Zach Greinke did, I think the answer to this question is yes. I think the answer to this question is Christian Walker is worth going outside of the norms, going outside of the guardrails. Why? Because it is a lot easier for this team to replace Christian Walker by just bringing back Christian Walker. He means a ton to this organization, both on the field, what he provides with his power, what he provides with his defense. This is a Gold Glove caliber, Silver Slugger caliber first baseman that you would have for the next couple of years. He's a leader of this team. He's been here for a long time. He's been through the ups and the downs. He's been here the highest of highs, this team going to the World Series, and he's been here for some pretty low lows. And so if that requires going outside of the norms, if that means we got to do something we don't normally do, I don't know if there's a player that fits that box more than Christian Walker. Ketel Marte might fit that box, but they came to a deal with him before he got to free agency. And so when a player that means this much, that is this valuable, that you can't replace Christian Walker's production for $25 million, $50 million, $75 million. There is a cost less than what Christian Walker is demanding. So if that means you have to go extra, you have to go the extra year, you have to get it to $100 million, you have to do something you've only done one other time in your franchise history, you need to make sure that when you pick those players, that they are players worthy of going outside the norms for. I think Christian Walker falls into that box. If they don't do it, don't be that surprised. I've just given you the roadmap. They don't do this. They've only done it once. Zach Greinke felt like a very unique situation. Felt like a very, this is our chance to make a big splash. We're going to make a big splash. Here goes Zach Greinke, $206.5 million. So this organization doesn't normally do this. So will they do it for Christian Walker? I don't know. I think they should. I wouldn't be surprised if they didn't. By the way, shout out producer Corey. I wasn't sure if we were going to get the outro music for our abridged version of the show. So credit to you for putting it in there. I was not sure if I was just going to have to randomly throw it a break.
Oh, you're fine.
That is going to do it for us here on this abridged version of the lunch break. We appreciate you joining us. Everybody, enjoy the rest of your day. Enjoy ASU women's basketball. Jeff Munn's got you coming up next. We are out of here. We will talk to you tomorrow. See ya.